Well, hello, regular Drews.
Hello, everyone. We need to start off right away with a content warning.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I know we have a lot of stereotyping and prejudice and a lot of the, just generally the mystery stories from this time, but this one is literally set on a plantation in Jim Crow era New Orleans, so it's really
intense.
Yes.
Yeah. So welcome to episode 93. As you mentioned there at the beginning, Kori, we are covering a very interesting mystery story today. It is number 35, The Haunted Showboat.
Yes.
Well, aren't you a regular Nancy Drew?
I learned that from the Nancy Drew detective.
Okay, go.
You think you can follow the clues and solve the case of the missing condiment, Nancy Drew?
Because I've read every Nancy Drew mystery ever written.
Nancy, please tell me you're joking.
Wow, you suck at this Nancy Drew stuff. You should get a new hobby.
My name is Carson Drew, and this is my assistant, Nancy.
Nancy Drew.
It's curtains for you, Miss Drew.
Nancy Drew strikes again.
A regular Nancy Drew.
And like you were saying, it takes place on a plantation in New Orleans in the 50s. So buckle up, boys and girls and everyone else.
So this is book number 35, which is, of course, the very first one that they did not revise because they only did the first 34. This came out, obviously, it was the newest one at the time that they were doing the revisions. But maybe it should have been revised, maybe This honestly felt like maybe a first draft that maybe we should have just left in drafts,
I have really complicated feelings about this. I was kind of telling you a little bit about it earlier. I do. The thing is that it is definitely racist.
Yes.
It's so very racist. There is very little about it that's not racist. The story in and of itself, I found very compelling and very suspenseful. And it was almost, it's not a revised text, for a text, the only version of the text being, it stood out to me as being very different from the other mystery stories in that it talked about slavery, openly.
Well, you have to. We're in the South here.
That's the thing. Yeah. But, there's lots of mystery stories where they don't do that kind of contextualization, right? Like Nancy visits other grand homes where they very clearly would have had slave quarters there, and they talk about them as being servants' quarters. And so it was just really kind of refreshing for that to hear them go on a tour of New Orleans and be like, oh, this is a story of how slaves were kept chained up in some lady's attic, and how horrible is that, and talking about how pirates sold slaves and stuff like that. So in that way, it was oh, wow. Okay. So we're talking about this, which is just so different. However, of course, this was written in 1957, like you were saying, in Jim Crow. And so written by a white woman, right? Yep. Very clearly are not making the connections of slavery and how it is impacting our current life and current world and current race relations. So yeah, it was almost aware and blissfully unaware at the same time.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it was really interesting to read. And I want to do I could write a whole freaking dissertation on this book. Yeah. And how you just deconstructing what it is that they're saying in this book about race and slavery is just fascinating to me as a cultural anthropology kind of way, not oh, I'm a reader and I'm enjoying this as a story kind of a way, right? So I don't know. Yeah, it's fascinating. And if you're at all interested in that, I highly, highly recommend this book because it was written in 1957, like we said. Like, it's just a very interesting encapsulation, I find, of like what must have been on people's minds at the time and how they must have been thinking about everything that was happening. Because it very much seems a bit like an ostrich, like head in the sand, kind of book. But it's just so fascinating. I don't know. Yeah, because it's almost like, how could you not mention, like, it's like this? We were in the thick of civil rights at this time. I just don't understand how we can't be talking about that when you have a book with so many Black characters in it. Like, so many. Like, I think, I mean, maybe not explicitly. I think explicitly we have 3 Black characters in this book. Only one of them is named. 2 of them are obviously also supposed to be Black in the way that they are characterized.
Which 2?
Mammy, Matilda, and Pappy Cole. Yeah, we never come out and say that they're Black, but it's quite obvious they're servants to white people on a plantation in the 50s. Like,
dark complexioned.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I must have missed that, but yeah. So, yeah. I do also have to say, and I want to give a warning here too, that this book frequently uses the term Negro. And of course, that was a socially acceptable term to use at the time in 57. And it's not necessarily a slur now by any means, but it just feels very strange to use that now. And so sometimes you might see us say that in the summary, but that's probably based on what the text was saying and how they're referring to someone. But also we will probably update that quite a bit and instead use Black or person of color or whatever, right? So yeah. There's a lot here.
I agree that there were some really great parts of the story. Like, there were some parts of the story that were really compelling. The Haunted Showboat was legitimately very interesting. Unfortunately, it was like the least important part of the entire story. I feel like it's not even about the showboat. Like, really, you could have titled this like the world's longest car chase and then some racism. Like, literally, it's a 20-chapter book. The first 10 chapters is just the car traveling to New Orleans. We don't even arrive in New Orleans until chapter 11. We briefly see the showboat for like 10 minutes, and then we don't actually explore it until chapter 15. And then from there, it's just like this really rushed scrambling to like finish the showboat story and also tie up everything, but we don't even tie up any of the loose ends or explain how it's related to the car chase thing very well at all.
Right.
And then it's just like over. And I feel like this like I know that the ghost stories weren't a thing yet, but it feels like they started with the idea for a ghost story and they're like, wait, let's just make this a novel. Wait a minute, we don't have enough like stuff to pad out 20 chapters. We really only have like 3 or 4 chapters here. And so they just came up with nonsense to surround it with, which was really frustrating.
Yeah, I definitely feel there were a lot of elements to this story, and it's like a lot of them did not seem super relevant. I will say I very much enjoyed the like romance subplot for Donna Mae in this book.
My gosh.
Even though it's definitely not relevant. I just found it hilarious and so funny to read. But yeah, no, like you were saying before, you were saying that before that this book could have used a revision because of all the racism.
And just because of the plot elements that don't really make sense. Yeah.
Yes. And I agree, but it's more that I wish it was rewritten like today in today's world, because I don't know. I just think there's so much to the story that is so good, that could be so great if we could just... And keeping all of the characters in all of it, but just adding the context and adding, you know, the reality of what it must be like living as a Black person in New Orleans at this time. You know what I mean? Like, oh, like there's just, I don't know. I just feel like there's so much opportunity for this story. And so, yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah.
This is kind of what we get.
I also want to complain here, and maybe it is really just the time period that it's written in, and obviously we were not born yet back then, but I feel like Harriet Stratemeyer, who wrote this book, has never been or had not yet ever been to New Orleans at the time.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I've been several times. I don't feel like it like characterizes or like captures what's going on in New Orleans at all. I don't know. Like when I think about New Orleans, I think about like the history, the architecture, the food, the music, like the cultural aspects of it, right? And this felt like, okay, let's look at the race dynamics, and then also there is the Mardi Gras, not Mardi Gras, the Mardi Gras, and they don't even say French Quarter, like they just call it the old city, and so that's kind of nitpicky, but it's just like
it didn't feel like it to you.
Yes, every other book that we have where they sit down for a meal, we get this like really long, extravagant explanation of what they're eating and all this stuff, and like we don't mention a single dish that they eat. They're like, Nancy sat down for dinner. It was excellent. It was the best meal she'd ever had. We don't say what they ate. Like we say nothing about actual
Southern food and
Cajun
New Orleans
food, anything
food,
like that. It would be so nice to just be like, Nancy had beignets and cornbread. Like do something to tell me that we're in New Orleans. It's just like, oh, they went to Canal Street. Great. Okay. And what about it? Tell me about Canal Street. I mean, we do get the parade at the end, but that feels more just like somebody read about New Orleans and then that's what they kind of just took. And they're like, let me put that in the story because that's the stereotype that I know about New Orleans is just the Mardi Gras parade. And that's it.
We actually get 2 parades.
That's true.
There's 2 different ones they go to. But then I think we also get their this is only one page in the book is like a tour that they take the first time they visit the city.
They do go to Jackson Square, and that's nice.
So and then Nancy talks about seeing the architecture or whatever, but it's not. I know what you mean. It's not like written into the story. It's not. It doesn't make the story about that. It doesn't weave that into the story. It's like one little part of the story. They go and they do those things. So it's not. It doesn't. It doesn't make the story feel very atmospheric, like it's actually set in New Orleans.
Right.
And I actually had that question when I was reading this book because it's kind of unclear where Donna Mae's family home is.
It's outside of New Orleans. It's a plantation outside of the city.
I knew that it was outside of the city, but when they are traveling there, they don't ever mention crossing the border into Louisiana. Like, they only mention getting into Mississippi.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, is their home in Mississippi then? And they're crossing the border every day to go to New Orleans? Like, it's possible that they live in Mississippi very close to the Louisiana border or something, but it's not clear. And so it's possible that the majority of the book doesn't even take place in Louisiana.
I'm pretty sure it's just near New Orleans, but New Orleans is right on the Mississippi border. So yeah. Oh, wow.
And kind of how they were talking about driving into it. I don't know. I could imagine that maybe it's not, but but like the fact that it's so unclear about where it is that they're actually staying is like not a good thing. Like, we want to know that, you know?
Well, in all of our other books that are not set in River Heights, they do this where they take a big portion of the story to make you feel like you're there. They describe the food in detail. They tell you all about the places that Nancy's staying and the dresses that she buys while they're exactly.
Like, freaking going to like square dancing things. They're talking about every single meal that they eat with like burgers and barbecue and all of that.
And we don't do that.
A taco.
Right?
Nancy eats a taco for the very first time in
italics. Yeah.
Yes. So, like,
And so it felt unusual that they wouldn't do that for this. And I was so excited for this book for that reason, that I wanted that New Orleans flavor. Like, I want to hear about Nancy going and listening to a jazz performance or eating beignet, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
But we don't get any of that. It's just like, okay, well, let's focus on the civil rights kind of stuff, which is fine as well. But
they don't actually do that, though, is like my point. Yeah, no, but it's like instead it's about like, this godforsaken road trip that takes way too long. Like,
and the car drama and just
the car drama. We'll talk about that, regular juries. But then also like just like going back and forth to the Showboat and then driving into the city and driving back out of the city and canoeing up and down the bayou, and like that's what it's about. It's not about anything else,
right?
And so a very small percentage of it actually occurs in New Orleans. Like, I think if you like counted the pages by setting and did like a percent, it would probably be like less than 10% of the book actually occurs in the city of New Orleans. Probably like 50% of it occurs at Sunnymead and or the Showboat and or on the bayou.
50% takes place in the car.
And then I was going to say like 40%, like the rest of it is in that car at the road trip at the very beginning.
Oh my gosh. That's ridiculous. So yeah, those are my main issues with it. How very, very stereotypy it is, how racist we get. And then just, there's not enough Showboat. Give me more of the hauntings.
I think I have some more to say about how I feel about the book in general. But I think I want to save it to the end. Because it'll make more sense when we get to the end, I think. But it gives it, I think that this book, I'll just tease it a little bit, my idea about this a little bit. I think that this book may be actually, or at least was meant to be, moderately progressive for 1957.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
And so I want to talk about that when we get to the end, which is honestly just like maybe a shocking thing to say when you hear about what the rest of this book is gonna be about and be like. But we can talk about that when we get to the end, you know.
Maybe we should also just make a note. Sometimes I feel like whenever we talk about the super old racism in some of these books, we tend to get a lot of comments telling us that like, hey, that was fine back then, and therefore it's not racist.
Or at least it doesn't bear discussion because that's just how it was, and you don't need to remark on it because it's obvious.
Just because something was socially acceptable at the time doesn't make it morally okay. There's a big difference. And so, of course, just because this was the norm, obviously treating people this way, othering people in the way that they do in this book was the norm. Everyone did it. Maybe Nancy can be like praised a little bit because she's, you know, so quote unquote progressive that she's not so affected by that norm, but it was still extremely racist. The fact that you're othering people at all is in and of itself racist. So we understand, yes, it was the norm back then.
Yeah, we understand that. But as making a podcast in 2024, obviously this is not our world. This is not the world we grew up in.
Of course.
I mean, it is our world. I'm saying it's not the time we grew up in. It's not the things that we're used to. And so we're going to talk about it.
Yes. Yes.
Because of that, and also because it bears saying, like you were saying. I do think it's important too to state that we are two white women. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so, of course, take everything we say with that understanding. But also, I think it's more important for us to talk about it because we are white women, and we do have this platform. Like, we need to be using our privilege to do that, to shed light on things that white people probably typically don't talk about. So yeah.
That's my soapbox.
Another
sorry.
thing. No, that's okay. Another thing. I'm almost done. I'm almost off my soapbox. It's just that I want to say too that our process is that we summarize the book, right? And so I want to make sure to clarify that when you're listening to this, it may not sound as bad or as egregious as Kori and I are like talking about the racist aspects of this book.
Right. Yeah.
Because of the nature of a summary and that I am trying to convey, you know, the broad strokes of the book in fewer words, right? But like, you know, with most things, racism is very much a devil in the details kind of thing, in that, like, it's sometimes very small. It's very common. It's passing in the book, right? So, like, it's not necessarily like this big, grand production. The racism that you find in books like this is like the things that they're calling people, or the way that they're making them talk, or things like that, which may not come across super well and super obviously in a summary. But we will talk about those moments probably more generally, but I may not get into the super specifics of them in every single piece of the summary, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. It's not like it's like a grand plot point or anything, but it is pretty constant throughout the book. Yeah. So it definitely, it's there. It just may not feel like it when we're talking about the summary, but yeah.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Let's talk about the cover art, because there is something really interesting to talk about at the cover art here.
There sure is. Oh my gosh.
So there is only one version of this cover that exists, and it's the one that was in 1957 when it was printed. It's a Rudy Nappy cover, and it's got Bess Nancy and George all on one side of it, looking out at the haunted showboat, and they're looking at two people rowing a rowboat over to the haunted showboat, which is a scene from the book.
And it looks super haunted because the showboat is like a little bit, I mean, it's not like sinking or anything, but it's a little bit dilapidated. Like there's an old tree that has fallen across some of the railings. It's broken. And yeah, I don't know. It's obviously very dark outside with the Spanish moss hanging down from the big oak trees. And oh, it's deliciously spooky in the moonlight. Love it.
I do have to say, too, I absolutely love the way that Nappy characterized George, Nancy, and Bess on this cover, because they look exactly the way that their characters act in scenes like this.
Right?
Like, George is, like, crouched down, like, ready to run, like, ready to go, do something. Nancy is looking on with, like, this curiosity, and, like, her hand is kind of raised, like, she's maybe a little bit uncertain, but she's observing very closely. Bess looks terrified.
She's, like, hiding behind Nancy too.
Yes.
It's great. Yes.
It's so good. It's such a lovely cover. And honestly, like, I think this may be one of my favorite covers out of all of the mystery stories because it's so good. But also, Kori,
the thing that I can't stop talking about.
Nancy has red hair on this cover.
For the first time.
For the first time. This is the first time we've ever seen a redheaded Nancy on the cover of a mystery story. And it may or may not be because there was a misprint on the cover art for this.
That's right. And I completely forgot to check how they describe her hair in the book. And I'm rereading chapter 1 now, and I don't think that it says.
Yeah, I don't think it ever said. I was on the lookout for it, and they described Bess and George, but I don't remember seeing them ever describe Nancy.
It just says blue eyes. And that's really all. Interesting.
So we'll have to maybe at some point we'll check 34 for it, and then we'll check 36
right.
See what was before and what was after to see, because our idea, regular Drews, is that this misprint happened, and then after this Nancy was always kind of referred to as being Titian, red-haired, as opposed to blonde, which she almost always was described as that, at least in the original text versions. The revised text, it kind of varies. So yeah, so fascinating.
Let's see. 3 words?
So I feel like road trip has to be one of the words.
Yeah, or just cars, because we have 3 different cars that Nancy drives in this one.
Or even just like vehicles, because it's like methods of transportation. And
That's
we talk about that a lot, but it's like they travel by car. There's talk of airplanes. They travel on canoes to get
multiple
to
different
boat.
Types of boats.
Like, yes.
At least 3 different types of boats. Vehicles. Yeah. I like vehicles.
And then I feel like Mardi Gras, because Mardi Gras, even though we only kind of talk about it referentially, it is the reason why they're there.
Mardi Gras?
The Mardi Gras?
I'm sorry, that just makes me laugh so much. It's every single time they say it in the book, it's the Mardi Gras. Which is
the Mardi Gras?
Not how you say it. It's just Mardi Gras.
Yeah, no, I agree. The Mardi Gras. We'll call it that.
Yeah.
So vehicles, the Mardi Gras. And then I don't know.
I don't feel like we get enough haunting for it to be anything spooky related.
Or pirates is another thing, but that's very brief.
I almost want to say like the swamp. I don't know.
Swamp could be. We could do voodoo.
Voodoo would be interesting. Maybe something about the engagement.
Oh, yeah. Relationship drama.
Relationship drama.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. Vehicles, the Mardi Gras, relationship drama. Perfect.
There we go.
That's it. All right. Okay, you ready to start?
Let's do it. You want to start us off?
Sure. So in chapter 1, Nancy gets invited to visit New Orleans with Bess and George. Their relatives, Colonel and Mrs. Haber, and their daughter Donna May live there, and they have some kind of undisclosed mystery going on that needs to be solved by Mardi Gras time.
Hold on. I need to add to the family tree.
Oh, yes, you do.
It appears that these aunt and uncle are related to both Bess and George, meaning mom's side of the family.
Correct.
So where were they in Sign of the Twisted Candles when inheritance was being handed out?
I don't know. And also, Donna May is very clearly supposed to be the same age, around the same age as Nancy, Bess, and George. So that further complicates it. You would think that if they're calling her cousin and their aunts and uncles, then that's probably like gotta be their mother's sibling somehow.
Unless their dads are also related. What
oh
if their moms are sisters and their dads are brothers?
No! We need to add incest to the
That's not incest.
It's too close for comfort.
It's very close. Technically, it's not incest, but that's really the only way you could explain all these other aunts and uncles that aren't in the Boonton Sidney clan.
What if it's like by law, right? So like, what if their mother? We know their mother has 2 brothers, right?
At least one brother.
One brother.
I think they have. It's the 2 sisters and then the brother who died.
Okay. But so, like, what if okay, now I don't know.
I have to, hold on, let me get the tree out because I can't remember the brothers. I wrote this down.
What if like, Mrs. Haver or something, their aunt Stella, I think her name is, or something. They only ever call her Mrs. Haber, really. What if she is married to, like, or was married to deceased brother, and now she's remarried? I don't know.
Okay, we don't actually know if Bess and George's moms have any siblings. It's just said that it's just the 2 of them. So that could leave it pretty open.
Yeah.
Unless their other siblings just didn't get the inheritance that they did.
Or it could be like a step-sibling kind of situation.
That's true.
They could have multiple marriages. Their parents could have been married multiple times.
It could be like a first cousin thing.
Yeah.
Because, like, my parents' first cousins, I call them aunt and uncle, even though they're technically like my second, third cousin once removed or whatever. I don't know.
Say that. Yeah.
Right. You just call them aunt and uncle because they're like about your parents' ages.
Yeah, when they're the same age. So it's kind of like that's the relationship. So yeah, it's very confusing. Anyway. Very murky. Yes. Anyway, so we learned from Bess and George that Donna May is currently dealing with messy relationship drama, having broken off an engagement with someone named Charles Bartolome. She pretty much fell in love with another guy named Alex Upgrove and is now engaged to him. The problem is that Charles is lending his steamboat, the River Princess, to Donna May's family for a Mardi Gras ball and like this big performance that they're putting on. And they actually plan to announce Donna May's engagement to Alex at this ball. So it's super awkward. Like, so awkward. So the girls plan to leave on this trip to New Orleans in a couple days, and Nancy starts running errands to prepare and is packing her suitcase. We get some lovely Togo moments at the beginning of this, though. He like ends up stealing a shawl that used to belong to Nancy's mom, and just in general being a little bit of a menace, which is just so adorable.
Yeah.
He is also described as being a terrier in this book. So just letting everybody know, the Togo lovers out there who keep track of this kind of thing. He's a terrier in this book. Nancy finishes packing her suitcase and puts it in her car. But then once she's back inside, Togo starts like barking and growling like crazy at the garage. So Nancy goes out to look and sees that someone has started to steal her car. They're like backing it out of her driveway. And so Nancy runs over to try to stop them. They end up like purposefully clipping Nancy with her own car, which is like hashtag brutal. Like, I'm not only am I going to steal your car, I'm going to hit you with it as I drive away. But they do end up getting away with her car. So Nancy is fine. She's maybe a little bruised from being run over a little bit, but she's fine. And they report the car theft to the police. And unfortunately, the man got away not just with Nancy's car, but also her suitcase, which had some sentimental like clothing items that had belonged to her mother. And so really that's what Nancy is most upset about, is losing that. And then Nancy tells everyone about the theft and, of course, how this, like, spoils their plan to drive down to New Orleans. And so Nancy asks Carson to get them plane tickets, but he's like, oh, all the flights are already booked for Mardi Gras, but luckily, don't worry, because remember, we're super rich. The Drews are super rich. So he just buys her a brand new yellow convertible. And was like, oh, don't worry, you know, I was gonna buy this for you anyway because there was like an ink stain on your upholstery or something. Oh my God.
I think this is the second time we've seen Carson just buy Nancy a brand new car whenever something happened to her old one. Secrets Could Kill. That was the first one when it blew up.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
he just bought her a new one the next day.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so at least we know it's according to Carson's character. It fits. It fits in. He just buys her a new car at the drop of a hat.
The man just loves purchasing cars. The car dealership sees him coming and they're like, yes.
Okay. But so Nancy in her new car goes out to buy new clothes for her trip since all her clothes were stolen. Like, I mean, can you believe what a life? Like, not only your car gets stolen and your suitcase full of clothes that you were planning on wearing on your trip gets stolen, and the next day your daddy just buys you a brand new car and then you get to go on a shopping spree to replace all of your stolen clothes. Oh, what? What a charmed life. What a charmed life.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, so then the next day they leave on their drive south, which also they're driving from like somewhere unnamed place in the Midwest to Louisiana.
Yeah,
Lord.
It's quite a drive.
It is quite a drive, as we will find out.
There's a train or something surely that they could get.
Anyway, a bus. Please, right. Oh my gosh, can you imagine our golden girl having to take a bus? No. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, yeah, so they drive south, and they're like cruising along when they start noticing a ticking sound coming from the glove compartment.
A mysterious ticking noise.
Yeah, thank you. Nancy Drew. So yeah, just have to come up with something for that. This ticking noise ends up being a legitimate bomb in the glove compartment. So they pull over and run away from it, and they like get a passing car to call the police over. And the police come and confirm that yes, it is a real legitimate bomb in their car and that someone must really hate Nancy for some reason. And then they end up taking the bomb away and ensuring that the car is safe and the girls continue on their trip. Nancy ends up pulling into a drugstore so she can call Carson and tell him about the bomb. And when they do, Bess and George see a man driving a black convertible slow down, stare at them, and then drive off. And they realize that that convertible they saw was actually Nancy's car that was stolen and that someone has painted it black. Bess notices this because I think she notices the ink stain on the cushion.
Right.
It's just hilarious. But like, yikes. And so Nancy comes back out of the drugstore and they're following this car that just passed them, which ends up attracting the attention of a police officer on a motorcycle who ends up helping them. But unfortunately, the car gets away and the girls just have to continue on their trip. A while later, they pull into a town to get some lunch and notice that something is wrong with the back of the car this time. It looks like the entire like rear housing or something. I don't know anything about cars. Just like came away from the car and is like dragging on the ground. And they happen to like pass a showroom on their way into this town that they notice had the exact same model of convertible that they are currently driving. So they take it there. And they determine that like someone has actually poured acid on Nancy's new car to like cause this damage. But of course, it's no worries because they're at this dealer and the dealer is so accommodating. He actually offers Nancy the use of his own car to continue driving on their road trip and that he'll keep Nancy's current convertible and get it all fixed up and have it ready to go for her whenever they drive back north.
So now we're on car number 3.
Car number 3. This one is just a dark sedan, so much more inconspicuous, thank goodness.
Probably smart, honestly. Yeah.
Right. So then they stop at a motel to rest and eat for the night. Nancy calls Hannah to give them an update on their trip. And Hannah ends up telling Nancy that they did find her car license plate dumped at like some cabin like out of town, but they also discovered something else. What was it, Kori?
A gun.
A gun! Oh no!
Yeah, so the thief must have just accidentally left it in the cabin. And of course, now Hannah is like super freaking out. She's really worried that obviously this person is pretty dangerous, right?
Because the bomb did not convince us of that already.
Right. Yeah. So this makes them decide, like, hey, we should not stop in this town overnight to sleep. We just need to, like, just keep moving, try to get as far away from here as possible. So they decide that they are just going to keep taking turns driving just all through the night just to just haul it to New Orleans as quickly as they can. It's Bess's turn to drive now, and it's pretty late in the night, and she comes to a crossroads and isn't sure which turn she needs to take. And both Nancy and George are like passed out in the back seat, so she like takes out this map, or she pulls over and takes out a map to look at to try to figure out which way to go. And then out of nowhere, this man just like pops up next to the window.
Remember, it's the middle of the night.
Middle of the night, we're pulled over on the side of the road in like not even a town.
No.
We're just out in the middle of nowhere. And of course, it's the 50s, so it's not like we have, you know, interstates with rest stops and that
Cell
kind of stuff that we
phones.
have these days. Yeah,
Right.
it might be 6 hours to the next town. We don't know where we are, just like in the middle of the where would we
Midwest.
be now? Like Tennessee woods or something
Yeah.
like that? Like, where are we? So she's looking at this map, and this man's face pops up at the window and is like, hey, can I help you get where you're going? And Bess is like freaking out, and this causes Nancy and George to wake up. And so they're all like, maybe we shouldn't trust this man, but he seems friendly enough that they end up kind of asking him for directions. And I think they're going to kind of debate to themselves later whether or not to actually take those directions. And they kind of start to leave, but then he's like, hey, maybe you girls are those girls that driver was asking about who was just here. And they're like, what? And he's like, yeah, just a few minutes ago, some guy came driving past here and he stopped and asked me if I'd seen 3 girls in a car driving this way.
Horrifying.
And so they asked for his description. It definitely sounds like the car thief, right? And so they're like, okay, yeah, definitely. So... And they convince that guy that they're not the 3 girls that he's thinking of, but they decide that, like, okay, yeah, now definitely we need to take a different direction than that guy told us, because what if he is secretly in league with the bad guy and is, like, telling us to go down this way because it's, like, a trap and the bad guy's waiting at the other end or whatever. Yeah, so whatever, we make our way, and eventually they do get to a little town that some of you may be familiar with. It's called Titusville.
Oh my God!
Yeah. So I don't know if this is the first time we mentioned Titusville in the series, but of course the game Secret of the Old Clock is set in Titusville.
Yeah.
Where the book was River Heights, but they made it Titusville for the game.
I feel like there has to be a reference in an earlier book to Titusville somewhere in some town that Nancy just ends up driving through, and that this...
You would think.
Yeah, that this is just like a reference to that, because it just seems so aside, but it also seems really far away.
Right. Yeah,
from
we're
where
a good,
they started.
Like,
a day,
15 hours drive away from River Heights now, so it's not like somewhere that Nancy would just casually be driving through anyway, just on her way home from somewhere else, like Titusville seems to be. Yeah, anyway, but yeah, so we stop in Titusville and we end up getting a motel room for the night, and they see another black convertible there, and they almost call the police, but then they like ask some questions to the front desk guy, and it is not the bad guy. It just turns out to be a random car that just looks similar. And then the next day they get up to leave and there's a snowstorm.
But they're like, nah, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, they debate. They're like, should we just stay here another night and just wait for the storm to pass? And they're like, no, what if it gets worse? We better just keep trucking along. So they wind up on this like really steep hill on their route, and they end up having to take a detour that leads them to this like really sharp drop off like the side of this hill. And just as they're reaching the top of the hill, they see a downed cable just like sparking in the middle of the road. And so Nancy has to brake not to hit this live wire, and the car just ends up like skidding around the wire. Right. Yeah. And so it's like inches from this deep drop off on the cliff when she stops. So it's a close call, but now the car is stuck. And they I
don't understand the scene, but they bounce the car.
Yeah. So it's too close to the edge for them to get out and push because they'd fall off or the car would end up backing out or something like that. So they end up swaying the car and bouncing it enough to bounce the back tires back onto the track.
Let me just remind everyone too that this is not their car. This is the car that belongs to the showroom dealer in whatever backwoods town they happen to be driving through.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is the longest side plot, and it's a plot hole as well.
Yes, because they never explain this.
Well, we never go back to any of these places. We make such a big deal about the whole we have to go back and return the car later. Mm-hmm. We're never going to leave New Orleans. The book ends in New Orleans.
Yeah.
So we can assume it happens, but it's not relevant. Right. And he's sabotaging us, and he doesn't even know who we are yet. The bad guy. So anyway, sorry. So we bounce the car back onto the route, and then they just end up reversing down the hill and turning around and going back the way they came anyway to find a different route. So they keep driving more until eventually they reach Alabama, and things just kind of are uneventful from there, and then they arrive in Louisiana. We get to the home of Bess and George's relatives. It's called Sunnymead. I can't tell if this is the name of the home or the town that the home is in. I feel like it's the name of the home.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, it's a former plantation.
Right.
So when we arrive, we meet Colonel and Mrs. Haver and their daughter, Donna May. And then we also meet their servants, Mamie Matilda and Pappy Cole. Mm-hmm. And then we are introduced to Donna's new fiance, Alex Upgrove. And Nancy instantly does not like him very much. She thinks that he is kind of he's got a superiority complex a little bit to him. So when they arrive, they all sit down together on the porch and have some tea together. And he starts leaning over to Nancy and whispering to her in secret and starts talking about how he and her are going to have such a wonderful time solving this plantation mystery together. And how he says some creepy things, and it's just really weird. And Nancy even finds it really inappropriate herself, especially because Donna May is sitting right there. Yeah. So she makes a point to turn around and be like, yes, I hope you and Donna May tell me everything about it. Mm-hmm. And he clearly gets annoyed that Nancy is taking it as a group thing when he clearly wants it to just be him and her.
Oh my gosh. We have to talk about this later.
I know. This man is so awful. So later, as Nancy, Bess, and George are all unpacking, Donna May comes up and is telling them all about Alex, how he went to Oxford and his family is super wealthy and European, and she hasn't actually met the family yet, but she knows that they're wonderful and she expects to meet them soon. And George makes a little comment to her about it. It's kind of funny. George is kind of not putting up with Donna May. Mm-hmm. But George actually asks her, hey, what happened with Charles, your former fiance? And she says that she broke up with him because basically he had to go out of town for a work trip or something like that. And while he was gone, she started dating Alex. Mm-hmm. And then he came back and was annoyed that she was dating Alex. Why are you cheating on me? And she's like, why are you being so possessive and jealous? And broke up with him that he was mad that she was cheating on him. So yeah, so then she gets together with Alex, right? And she says that she does feel a little bit guilty for treating Charles that way, but Alex is so wonderful and he's more aggressive than Charles anyway, so obviously he's the better pick.
What the heck? When she said that, I was more aggressive. What the hell? That's not a desirable trait, Donna May.
Was it in the 50s?
I don't know. I don't know what she could have meant. Does she just mean that he's more manly, more but aggressive is so specific. It's such a specific thing to say.
About what? About pursuing her, or just in general, he's just a more agitated type of guy, or
I don't know. It's bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah, so then she goes downstairs and Bess and George remark that she is not like herself at all. This is not normally how she behaves. It seems like Alex is kind of negatively influencing her. So later that day, they go downstairs and the colonel starts telling Nancy about the actual mystery that we're going to solve. And he says that he's called her out here because there have been strange happenings on this boat that he owns called the River Princess. Workmen who were in the process of restoring it will no longer go anywhere near it. Like, they refuse to even step foot on the boat. And of course, the boat is where they have planned to host Donna Mae's like engagement party, ball, performance thing, whatever. So it's pretty urgent that they get this issue cleared up and dehaunted so that they can proceed with their party. He tells Nancy, you've got free reign to investigate this thing. You don't even have to check in with me. Like, you're not reporting to anybody. Please just go out and solve this thing. So the next day, Alex and Donna invite them out for a little tour of New Orleans. They also, Donna like forces them to agree to participate in this play that she's putting on for her party. Mm-hmm. And they go to a costume shop and she chooses fairy costumes for them to wear. It's not super like relevant at all, but they all seem like really annoyed about the fairy costumes. Like, they don't want to be fairies. I don't know if they just don't want to be in the play or they don't like the fairies themselves. I don't know.
They think the costumes look ridiculous. I think that's what it is.
They have a big attitude about the costumes.
And George specifically is like, I don't want to wear this skirt.
Yeah. But then we actually get a pretty decent tour of New Orleans, like you were saying earlier. They go to Jackson Square. They kind of walk around the French Quarter a little bit. They talk a little bit about the city's history, a haunted house that they see. Of course, the Lafitte pirate brothers, John Lafitte, and of course the history of slavery in the city. So then while they're walking down one street, Nancy notices the car thief following them. I think they're just like going like window shopping, basically just kind of going store to store and like looking in at some art and stuff. So they decide that they're just going to kind of duck into a shop. It's Nancy, Bess, George, and Donna all go into the shop, but Alex stays outside. And while they're in the store, Nancy sees the car thief walk up to Alex and start talking to him.
Immediately sus. Immediately.
I don't see how we don't
honestly
confront him right away.
He's sus from the beginning when he hit on Nancy. Like, we all know he's a bad guy. So, like, yeah, it's just obvious now. From the moment we knew he was looking like he was stepping out on Donna Mae, we knew he was a bad dude, and so probably a criminal.
So the car thief guy kind of leaves, and Nancy goes outside and is like, "Hey, Alex, what was that about?" And he's like, "Oh, nothing. It's fine. That guy is an artist, and he wanted to paint your picture." And Nancy's like, "Okay, that's a lie. Anyway, let's keep walking." And so they stop for lunch or something, and Nancy excuses herself to go use a phone booth because she's going to report to the police that she's just seen the car thief in the area. So she does, nothing significant about that. But when she hangs up and turns around, Alex is right there eavesdropping on her conversation outside the phone booth.
This is wild.
Confront him.
He apparently has heard her whole conversation on the phone with the police, and he, like, quote unquote, chides her for not telling him about this, and, like, says, "Oh, well, Nancy, like, I could be so much help to you if you would just, like, let me in on the details and stop being so mysterious." And I want to punch him in his stupid face. Right. Anyway, he's so annoying. But after lunch, they go back to Sunnymead, and Donna Mae wants to have a dress rehearsal for the play. Everyone puts on their costumes, and Mrs. Haver comes to the rescue and tells Donna Mae that the fairy costumes that she chose for the girls are definitely not appropriate, which is funny because they're, like, apparently supposed to be dressed as ladies in waiting. Although I remember that the play that they're supposed to be performing is Sleeping Beauty. It would make way more sense for Nancy, Bess, and George to be dressed up as fairies over ladies in waiting.
I missed the Sleeping Beauty part because I was like, why would she go in with the idea of ladies in waiting and assume that fairy wings was like the go-to costume? I was like, why would she choose that? But that makes so much more sense. Okay.
And also, like, I appreciate Mrs. Haver for coming in and telling the girls that, like, you need different costumes. You shouldn't wear those. And the girls are very relieved that they don't have to wear those costumes. But it's like, if I were in charge of this production, Donna Mae is right. Fairy costumes are way better than ladies in waiting costumes.
Yes.
Sorry, not sorry. And also, if they are like quote unquote inappropriate, like I think she means that the skirts are probably a little bit short, is my guess. I'm sure it's like, my guess is that it's like a ballerina type skirt, like fairy type skirt, you know?
Okay. I just thought it meant inappropriate for the setting of the play or
Maybe.
whatever.
It's kind of unclear what she means by inappropriate, but I could kind of feel that subtext there, especially because of how uncomfortable the girls were with the costumes. And so I think it was that. But like that's so much better. Like costumes are supposed to stand out. I'm sorry. I think Donna Mae is right. Anyway, this does not matter at all. But yeah, so they nix the fairy costumes, and then when they were practicing on this makeshift stage that they made in their living room or something, Bess ends up falling off of it, and kind of injures her arm, so she has to go rest, and the rest of the rehearsal is postponed, and Donna Mae's super upset because of the costume thing, and now Bess is injured, and now the rehearsal's postponed, and she's just worried that nobody is taking the performance seriously like she is. And of course, it's really high stakes for her because her engagement is going to be announced at this thing, so it is a big deal for Donna Mae. So I feel like throughout the book, we try to like make Donna Mae seem like she's really like stupid and flighty and unintelligent and everything. And yes, she cheated on Charles, and that is not cool. And she definitely is like flitting from man to man, and that's probably not great. But I think it's annoying to characterize her commitment to this production as being unreasonable.
Right.
When I think it's just clear that she just has a really good vision for it.
She's got high standards. That's not her fault.
She does. Anyway, but yeah, the girls are really annoyed with Donna's attitude because she doesn't seem to care that Bess is injured, which, okay, fair. Is probably fair. But Bess says that it's probably really because she's actually feeling guilty about the whole Charles Bartolome situation. And so that's just kind of like bleeding into like everything else, right? Which is interesting, and I love that comment came from Bess because Bess is so perceptive, and she's like, I can see through you. You're acting a little bit foolish, but really it's because you're hurting on the inside. So that evening, Alex ends up pulling Nancy aside and asks her like what her plans are for the mystery, and she's like, I don't have any yet. You know? And he's like, oh, okay, well, do you want to take a canoe trip with me early tomorrow morning to go out and see the Showboat? And Nancy is like, absolutely not. I don't want to do that. She doesn't say it's like, I don't want to go with you, but she says that like, no, we're too inexperienced, both of us on the bayou, to go out and do that by ourselves. So no, thank you, you know? But of course she does actually want to go out and see the Showboat. And so she ends up going downstairs to talk with Mammy Matilda and Pappy Cole about it. And she asked them if they happen to know a guide that could take her through the swamp to get where the riverboat is. At first, they really tried to dissuade her, like telling her that it's definitely haunted and that whenever workmen made repairs to it, like they would come back the next day and like all of their work would be ruined and like floors and like walls would be like ripped up. But Nancy is determined, so they end up recommending this man named Uncle Rufus to her, who they say is very wise and knows the bayou. So, cool. She ends up meeting him the next morning, and he takes Bess, George, and Nancy out in his canoe. We have to talk about Uncle Rufus in depth.
Yes.
Later. Of course, unfortunately, anytime there is mention of a canoe, you just know someone is going to fall out of it, and that is exactly what happens. They are, rowing down the bayou, and they end up, like, hitting something in the water, and the canoe dumps them all out. So they're all fine. And they end up discovering that there's some kind of like barricade in the water that has stopped them and actually tears a hole in the canoe. And while they're discussing this, they hear another boat approach. And what would you know? It is Alex, who just happens to be there. And he is shocked to find them here and says that he was just rowing in this area earlier and there wasn't a barricade here like 30 minutes ago.
I bet there wasn't.
Yeah, I bet you put it there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he rows them all back to the Sunnymead to like get cleaned up. And tells Nancy that he's going to tell the colonel that they should not be investigating anymore because clearly it's too dangerous and they are not equipped enough to, handle it, right? Of course, this is thoroughly irritating to Nancy, and she decides that she is going to secretly arrange for Uncle Rufus to take them back later that day, but this time without letting anyone know what they're doing, like what they're up to, where they're going. So she does that, and then the girls clean up, and then they sneak back out to Uncle Rufus's house. But when they arrive, they get scared because they can clearly hear that some kind of voodoo ritual is happening inside the house. Like there's singing and chanting, and it sounds like voodoo. And actually a boy ends up coming out of the house, and the girls ask about Uncle Rufus, and he ends up confirming that Uncle Rufus is a voodoo doctor. So
I was so scared of where this was going to go.
I know, but this is why I think this is why I think this book is more progressive than, or was trying to be progressive for the time. And it's their treatment of voodoo.
It is. Well, and at this point, Bess makes a comment like, oh, I hope he doesn't put a curse on us, or like, I don't want to be cursed or something like that, assuming that he would be doing this is like a harmful thing or only to hurt people. But we change from that. Like the way we talk about it after this moment in the book is okay from here. Actually, I was really surprised by how they handled this.
Yeah, like the girls are clearly very scared and apprehensive of it, and they don't want to engage with it too much. But Uncle Rufus doesn't really press them about it. Like they never. It never becomes uncomfortable for them later again. It just is like a known fact that Uncle Rufus is a voodoo doctor, and we'll talk more about it later. So Nancy ends up having the thought that Uncle Rufus could be using the River Princess for voodoo reasons, and so is trying to scare people away from it. So she files that in the back of her mind to investigate more later. Eventually, a woman comes out of his house, and she's like humming, and they say that she's in like a trance-like state or something. And then Rufus comes out as well and tells them that she came to him with a limp, and after singing in prayer, she's cured now. And so the girls are like, oh, good. We're so glad, but they're so clearly freaked out. It's actually really hilarious. So they head back out in a different canoe. This time it's a smooth ride, thankfully. Although they do hear a bird call, which Uncle Rufus identifies as being like the fakest imitation of a bird call that he's ever heard. And then they hear like another fake bird call back. And so Uncle Rufus says that, oh, there must be some city boys in the bayou playing games, And Nancy, of course, thinks like, no, they're probably acting lookout for the River Princess or something, right? Because they do finally come to the River Princess, and then they hear a hammering on board, which at first scares Uncle Rufus, but it turns out to just be Charles Bartolome. He's here working on the boat. He's an architect, so that's why he had I don't know if so this is a little bit confusing, but the River Princess is on Colonel Haver's property, so I guess by association, by that fact, he owns the boat, but Charles was working on it and promised to work on it to restore it when he and Donna May were together. And so he's still doing that and holding to his word. But also the River Princess, we'll talk more about this later too, it didn't originally belong to either one of them. It washed up here after a storm a long time ago. At the beginning of the book, I assumed that Charles owned it, but he definitely does not.
No, he's just been hired to fix it up. Yeah.
Right. But so anyway, he's here. He's working on the boat. And immediately the girls like him so much better than Alex. And they wonder how on earth Donna May could choose Alex over him. He certainly seems way more tactful than Alex, at least. And he does not remark on the upcoming party or Donna's engagement and all. And he's very pleasant to the girls. And he shows them around the riverboat. And they see the auditorium and all the other rooms on board. And then they're on the lower deck when Nancy finds something in the crack in between two floorboards.
It's a gold hairpin. And it looks like, nice and shiny still. It doesn't look like it's been laying there for a long time. And Charles recognizes it and is like, oh, this is Mrs. Haver's. So what is it doing here? So Nancy decides to ask Charles about the bird calls, and he says that he heard them but didn't realize that they were fake. And Nancy says that she's pretty sure they're from someone who must be watching the boat right now. And this alarms Charles, so they decide to like search around the boat for a little while. They do, but they don't end up finding anyone. Nancy asks Charles if he's ever been out on the boat after dark, and he says that he has not. But he can tell just from her asking that she actually really wants to look around after dark, so he invites them to come to dinner at his house, I think like the next night, and then after dinner with his mother, they will go explore the boat at dark. Bess is not super thrilled about this idea at all, but Nancy is really excited, so they all agree. On their way back in the canoe, Uncle Rufus starts talking about how his ancestors invented the first long-distance communication, which was like a form of drumming.
I know this seems like a really random aside that I put in there, but I find this as like one of like the most egregious like parts of racism in this book, and so I really wanted to specifically mention that. But we can talk more about that moment later. I really wanted to put that in there. So
we talk about the drums a lot.
Yeah.
After this, I feel like. Yeah. So, but on their way home, they pass by some water lilies, and Nancy decides that she needs to take some flowers from the water lilies to Mrs. Haver. So she like reaches out to pick some of the flowers, and Beth starts screaming for Nancy, like, look out, because an alligator has come up from under the water and is like about to chomp Nancy's arm off. So she's fine. She gets away just in time. She pulls her arm out of the way, and they paddle away from the alligator. Whatever. Once they get back to the Haver house, they end up telling everyone about their adventure and seeing the Showboat. And Alex starts saying that he really thinks that they should give up on the whole Showboat plan and just instead have the performance at the house. It's really weird. They start like rearranging the living room furniture to like make room for them to rehearse and stuff like that. Anyway, so Mrs. Haver invites them to like a dinner party that she's going to at her neighbor's house the next day, but they're like, oh no, sorry, we already promised Charles and his mom that we'd go to dinner at their house. And Donna Mae bursts into tears at this and runs out of the room. Obviously, she's very upset, so Nancy follows her to talk to her and is like, oh, we can cancel dinner if you really mind, and like, are you okay? And as soon as she gets into the room, though, Donna Mae's just like acting like it didn't happen, like just like a minute later, and she's like, oh, no, that's fine. It's cool. I'm totally unbothered. Whatever.
Oh, this poor girl.
Yeah. But then later that evening, Donna Mae and Alex invite them to like go on another tour tomorrow. And Nancy's like, okay, yeah, obviously this sounds like it's nice, but what if they try to like make us miss this dinner because we're in New Orleans? So they agree to go, but Nancy's like, I'm going to drive my own car just in case we need to leave early type of thing. So also at this point, Nancy goes to Mrs. Haver and shows her the hairpin that they found on the boat. And she's like, oh my gosh, where'd you find my hairpin? So she goes to her jewelry box and her hairpin is there. And so she realizes it's not hers at all. It just looks like it. And so she's really confused. She's like, how did you find an identical hairpin on the riverboat, but it's not my hairpin because it's right here? This is really strange.
This is a plot hole.
Yeah.
This
so
is
we
another
really
plot hole.
Yeah. We really can't get any more information out of this. So whatever. We flash to the next morning. They're heading out to New Orleans and they're following behind Alex, who is driving him and Donna Mae in his car, but they're taking this like really random, long, circular roundabout route into the city. And as they're driving through a neighborhood, she notices Alex kind of like slow down and just throw a piece of paper out his window. And Nancy's like, that was weird. So she pulls over to the same spot and she gets out and she picks up the paper. And it's just like this weird sketch. It's not even a sketch. It's like a rectangular drawing with just like a line through it. Mm-hmm. And it's like a red rectangle or something and like a gold line, but no words or anything like that on the page. And as she's looking at this, she hears Alex ask, like, what are you doing? And he has like seen her stop to pick this up. So he takes it from her and is like, oh, my kid cousin drew that. It's none of your business. Give it back to me. But then says he doesn't want it anymore. So he just crumples it up and throws it back down on the ground. Mm-hmm. And they all get back in their cars and drive away.
Okay, right here, we don't need any other information. Alex is a criminal. He just littered.
Yeah.
He just littered.
Yeah.
I cannot stand people who litter.
Come
that is
on.
like my biggest, like, there's nothing that will incense me more immediately than seeing someone flick a cigarette butt onto the ground, drop a piece of paper, throw their a can of soda out of the window of their car. Nothing will make me more murderous more quickly.
It's so easy not to do this. It's not like it was an accident. It's not like he couldn't have just kept his trash in his car and thrown it away next time he got out or went home or whatever and thrown away at home. No, he chooses to throw it out the window.
Ugh, horrible. He's the worst.
Yes. Yeah, so he throws it on the ground, and then they all get back in their cars and they keep driving. But then as he's like turning a corner, Nancy just jumps out of her own car and is like, George, you take the wheel. And she says, I'll meet y'all at lunch. And then she just runs away. It's wonderful.
I picture her literally like just bailing as the car is still moving, just like opening her door and just yeeting herself out of a moving vehicle. Yeah. And George has to like quickly slide over into the driver's seat. That's just what I picture.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's what happened.
No warning, just driver bailing from the car.
Yeah. So Bess and George are sitting here looking at each other like, oh, what was that? Okay. So George takes the wheel, and they continue to follow Alex in his car, but they know that like he's going to be so mad when he like realizes that she's gone. And of course they are correct, because when they meet up, he gets so aggravated that he decides to go back and look for her.
This man is obsessed with Nancy. He is obsessed.
It makes me so worried, because like what would he have done if she had agreed to go with him like in the middle of the night when he'd wanted her to?
Oh my gosh.
Dude. Okay. Anyway. So he jumps in his car and like goes to look for Nancy as well. So George does the same thing, jumps into Nancy's car and then follows him. Meanwhile, we flash back to Nancy. She's just gone back to where he'd thrown the piece of paper on the street and picks it up. Or no, she'd gone back to pick it up and then realizes that it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So does this mean that he purposely dropped it there so that somebody else could come retrieve it? Yes. And then at this point, Nancy is, again, they're just in like some random neighborhood. So she's just standing on the sidewalk. And she is, this is the racist thing that she says here.
I don't remember that. Well, I remember that they refer to her as Negro, but and it was just seemed random, like unimportant. I was like, it's literally just like a witness. Like, why are you calling it out at the weirdest time? You know what I mean? Like when you don't even call Mammy Matilda and Pappy Cole that, but you call this random lady that. It's just, yeah.
Well, it's the way that the way that Nancy speaks to her. Because she's coming out of this house and Nancy sees this black woman walking up and she's going to ask her about the neighborhood or whatever. But Nancy doesn't ask about the neighborhood. She asks about your employer's neighborhood.
Oh.
Like assuming that this woman would never in any circumstance live in this neighborhood. She's clearly just here because she's a servant of whatever family that lives here. And so I thought that was a pretty racist.
Do you mind telling me who lives in the house where you work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. Like Nancy, you don't know that she works here. She could just be coming home from the grocery store. Like leave her alone.
Mm-hmm.
And no, but we assume that she's working there. She's right, but But so this woman starts telling her like, oh yeah, this neighborhood used to be really great until they opened that boarding house down the street. And Nancy's like, what boarding house? And she's like, oh yeah, there's this like New York travel agency that keeps sending people to stay in this house. And Nancy remembers, hey, Alex said that he's from upstate New York. Maybe he's communicating with somebody in the house, or maybe he knows somebody in the house. That must be who he was dropping the paper for, right? And she thought, or she also has the thought, you know, this seems like kind of a place that a car thief might stay. Some sort of boarding house like that, obviously, right? So
where else would a car thief stay? A hotel?
Right?
Like, God forbid.
So on a hunch, Nancy walks around to the back of this boarding house, and there she finds a black convertible. So she starts examining the convertible a little bit, but at this time, the boarding house owner comes out and tells her to basically get out, stop snooping, and forces her to leave. So when she gets back to the street, Alex and George have shown up by now, and she explains what she's doing and tells them that the police need to be called. So Alex and George go off to get a police officer, and Nancy just waits in front of the house. And when they get back, they find that the car is missing. So the boarding house people must have taken it away or gone and got somebody to take it away, but it is gone now. So Nancy starts kicking herself, and she gives the plate of the car to the police, and the police talk to the boarding house owner and everything, but Nancy thinks that nothing is probably going to come of this.
Yeah.
Then they all go meet Donna and Bess for lunch, and Donna pronounces to all that she has decided to invite Ned, Bert, and Dave to the Mardi Gras, to the party that they're going to have.
The Mardi Gras.
This was kind of weird to me. I felt like she was doing this kind of out of spite. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, no, she definitely was. Because that's like the first thing that Nancy, Bess, and George say is like they realize that like she's only doing this because she's worried that one of them is gonna like
go
hit
after
it off
Alex.
with Charles. No,
Oh,
Charles.
with Charles. Oh, okay.
She doesn't care about Alex. Yeah, no, she's worried because they have the dinner date planned with him.
Right. Okay.
So she's worried that that's going to happen. And so she's inviting their, beaux or whatever to come down to like prevent that from happening. Yeah. And so like very quickly, Nancy, Bess, and George start saying about, oh my gosh, yes, Donna, such a great idea. We would love to see them. And like, there's no one else you would want to go out with more than them. Like,
yeah.
Don't worry. It's pretty hilarious. And then after lunch, Alex announces that he's rented a boat for them to tour the Mississippi River. I'm sorry. You could not pay me to get into a boat with this man.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems like he's going to wreck it or something. Like drive really fast in the boat or something and we're all going to die. He just seems like the type. But anyway, they all head to the riverfront and climb aboard to go on this boat tour with him. Unfortunately, however, it becomes really clear that both Alex and Donna want to take their sweet time on this boat, even though repeatedly Nancy's like, remember, we have that dinner engagement. We really have to get back, all of that stuff. They don't care. And they end up going so far that they actually end up running out of gas on the river.
Gosh.
They were going like upstream though. So Alex is like, oh, it's fine. Like we'll just take our leisurely float downstream and we'll eventually get back to, the dock or whatever. But Nancy is like, no way, dude. And she ends up taking off her skirt, diving off of the boat and swimming to shore to find someone to bring them gas.
Way to go, Nancy.
This is such a baller move, but like really dangerous. Like probably don't swim in the Mississippi.
Oh my gosh, no.
I mean, hopefully it wasn't as polluted in the 1950s, but like it was a major thoroughfare. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the Mississippi River is massive and it is like probably the most populated river in the US because it's used so much for trade and has been since we've been in that area. Like it's like, yeah. So
not to mention the gators. I mean,
right. Yeah.
Oh my
no,
gosh.
I was talking about getting hit by a boat, but she can also be eaten by an alligator. Anyway. But she is successful. She ends up finding some guy, and he like boats her back over to their boat and gives them a can of gas so that they can get back to the dock. And once they do, the girls disembark and they rush back home to get ready for their dinner. They end up having to like call and say that they'll be late because this whole adventure has taken them too long. But eventually they do successfully make it to the Bartolome's estate, which we learn is called Oleander Manor. How much you want to bet this is also a plantation?
Of course. Yes, definitely.
We don't specifically call it out the way we call out Sunnymead as a plantation, but it's almost like 100%. Like it's got to be. It's called an estate. Yeah. So,
yeah.
Right. But as they are driving up to the house, They're like going up this long drive, and someone that's like in the bushes off on the side of the drive throws a rock at Nancy, and it like barely misses both Nancy and George in the car. And then they look over and they see this guy just like running through the trees, and they start to try to follow him, but he gets away. And then soon after, Charles comes down the drive and greets them, and they tell him what's just happened, and he confesses that he has also been targeted recently. He tells them that someone shot at one of his tires and at him just earlier today.
Oh my gosh.
Shot at him while he was on the boat. Scary. And so he says, oh, but don't worry, for our trip tonight as an extra precaution, I've brought 2 of my friends to come with us. Well, that'll help if we have a freaking sniper off
right
the like side of the river who's shooting at us right now. Oh yeah, just a couple more bodies. Like, what the heck?
2 more teenage boys will solve this one.
But okay, cool, Charles.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but they're also here for dinner, and their names are Jack and Frank, and we meet them, and everybody has a nice dinner together, and it's fine. And then afterwards, they all sneak out to canoes to take on the bayou to the boat. When they start to get closer to the River Princess, they start to hear the steady beat of a drum. And so Nancy is now positive that there is some voodoo ritual going on tonight because of the drums, and also because it's a full moon for some reason. She thinks that means it's more likely. Okay. And so then they approach the River Princess, and they start to hear more music. But as soon as they reach the boat, it stops. So they all pause, and they're listening because everything's just gone dead silent. And then they see a ghostly figure in white cross the deck of the boat and then disappear. And then they start to hear chanting. I do just want to point out really here that this is the spookiest scene ever, and I've got to give them props for that, because this is so tense and so enjoyable to read because it's so suspenseful. So I got to give them props for the riverboat haunting is very spooky.
This is definitely my favorite part for sure.
Yeah. So Nancy, after hearing this chanting, desperately wants to get on board of this boat to go see what is going on. So they all canoe over to a strip of land that leads to the boat. But as soon as they step out of the canoes, the chanting just stops again. So it's just gone silent again. And so they pause again, and then they hear the sound of another boat approaching. And they watch, and they see an elderly man and a woman, both dressed in colonial attire, rowing in a rowboat, approaching the River Princess, and then they climb aboard. So the woman ends up going down to where there, I guess, was once a gangplank on this ship or boat or whatever, where passengers would come aboard, and then she starts to greet imaginary passengers, as if they were coming aboard the boat for a performance or something. And so to Nancy remarks that it seems well, she doesn't say this, but it seems like she is probably suffering from some kind of form of dementia, or she is in a trance, a voodoo trance.
Right.
It's what she thinks. So the woman talks to the man about how she's so excited for the performance tonight, but then the man persuades her to come back down into the boat instead of staying on board for the quote-unquote performance, so that they can row through the lilies or something. I really want to talk about this later too, because this is so weird to me. But anyway, so Nancy decides that they should follow them to try to figure out where they're headed and try to talk to the man on his own without disturbing the woman. So she and Charles follow them in their canoe while Bess, George, Jack, and Frank stay behind to watch the riverboat. They end up following them through the bayou to a small home, and the woman gets out as if she's saying goodbye to the man after a date and goes inside. And then the man waits until she turns off the lights inside the house, and then gets out of the boat and starts to follow her. But then, so Nancy has Charles pull up their canoe to this dock and flags this guy down. And she's like, I'm so sorry for just like, jumping at you really randomly out here or whatever. But I need to ask you a question. And she explains the whole riverboat situation about the haunting and everything, and asks him if he knows anything about the situation or about the boat. And what do you know?
And he sure does. He introduces himself as Henry, and he says that the woman is his twin sister, Lavinia, which is interesting. Twin sister, not his wife or girlfriend.
Not wife, not girlfriend, not lover, not date, even though they were definitely just on a date. Like, they even, I swear, they mentioned, like, oh, how romantic it will be to, hold on.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I want to show you how lovely the wild orchids near here are in the moonlight, is what he says to her. And Nancy, when they get to the dock, says, I'm pretty sure she says, she says, the show was delightful, wasn't it? Have a good night's sleep, dear, and do come over soon. I'll be expecting you. And then he says, yes, honey, I will. Without another word, the woman tripped girlishly up the walk through the garden and entered the house.
Yeah, that description is a little bit too familiar for even twin siblings. Yeah.
We were talking about incest earlier, and I mean, maybe... Yikes.
Yuck.
Yikes. Anyway, sorry.
Well, he explains that their grandfather actually used to own the River Princess, and they spent their entire childhood on it. But then one day there was a really bad storm and a flood that carried the riverboat to its current location, and their grandfather was actually killed during the storm. So we don't really talk about the ownership of it because, like, assuming that the grandfather owned it at the time of his death, which they say that he did, then it would have passed to his heirs. So wouldn't it have stayed in the family? So did they sell it to the Havers, or do the Havers just now own it because it just happened to float to their property?
Well, I think because after the storm it was so wrecked, it couldn't be used anymore. It couldn't be like driven. I guess, do you drive a boat? I don't know. It couldn't be like sailed down river or upriver or anything, and so they just abandoned it, is my understanding. Yeah. I don't know when the Havers, maybe the Haver, you would think that this is because I think they call it out as like being their family home. So you would assume they've owned it for like a long time.
Right.
If it wasn't like inherited from them by their family. And so, yeah, I don't know.
I get that it's like abandoned or whatever, but that doesn't make the Havers now the rightful owners. Like this family should still own it, even if it's not physically on their property in their possession, like,
right.
But anyway, so yes, it's been there ever since this big storm. And Lavinia was very, very upset by the death of their grandfather, but eventually seemed like she had recovered and was okay because she ended up, growing up, getting married, having a family, all that kind of stuff. But then a few years ago, her husband passed away. And ever since then, she has done what they say, quote unquote, retreated into her memories. So after he retired, Henry moved in to help her. And she frequently comes and asks to go visit the riverboat because she thinks that, like, it's still whatever year it was when the family last owned it. And it makes her really, really happy to get to go out and do this. So this is just what they do. They put on these like costumes from the time period and they go out there because she thinks that it's that year. He also says that he knows nothing about the ghostly figure or the music on board, but he did say that he heard the drums in the bayou, but thought that it was just some rando playing them. Some black person that owns a drum and is playing the drums. Yeah.
He says, quote unquote, some Negro. So, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So Nancy tells him about the hairpin that she found on the boat, and he says that, hey, that looks exactly like one that Lavinia lost on the boat. So that solves that mystery. We don't know why they have identical hairpins. Yeah. Maybe it's just like one that was mass produced around this time in this area or something like that. Yeah. So it's just like a common hairpin.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. It doesn't really matter that much. No. But then Nancy mentions that she thinks that Uncle Rufus may be holding voodoo ceremonies on the boat. We have no reason to believe this. It's just a hunch that it could technically be possible. because he practices voodoo. And Henry is adamant that that is not the case because Uncle Rufus is this very respectable man in the community, and he's done a lot of good for a lot of people and would not just be sneaking around for no reason.
Let me try to find that spot because I think that that's just such an important moment.
Yeah.
I would like to read it. Let me see. Do you know Uncle Rufus? Nancy asked. When the elderly man nodded, she said, do you think he could be leading the voodoo meetings? Mr. de Laverne vetoed this possibility. Uncle Rufus is a fine, highly respected man in the neighborhood. He does a great deal of good. He certainly would not conduct any such secret meetings. So, like, I don't know. From that, I read, like, yeah, he knows that he does voodoo, and it's a good thing. But
I kind of read it as like he would never do voodoo because he's so respectable. Yeah,
I see.
But surely it's like known that he does voodoo in the community, and it's just like a known thing. It doesn't seem
like a secret because people go to him. The little boy openly told them when they came by that he was a voodoo doctor. Like Mammy Matilda and Pappy Cole, or like, yeah, he's really wise. He'll be a good guide for you on the bayou. You know, like,
yeah,
I don't know. It seems like everybody knows about it. So, yeah.
I guess just from this point, it's only been black characters that have told us about the voodoo, and now it's the first white person being like, "Oh, he would never. That's not him," you know. And so I just read it as like, "No, he doesn't do that kind of stuff."
I thought he just meant that he wouldn't it wouldn't be secret, that like he wouldn't be sneaking around doing that stuff because he's like, there was no need for him to do that, and like because he's such a good guy, he wouldn't do that. He's actually helping people. That's what I read. But
that makes it so much better. That's so much better. Yeah.
But you're totally right. You probably could read it either way. But so it's really interesting that you say that because that moment is actually one of the reasons why I think this book is so progressive for the time. Yeah. I was like, wow, I can't believe that they're like totally cool with that. But they seem to be. But yeah, you're right. I guess it could go either way.
I don't know. But yeah, so Nancy says that she wants to clear up the mystery she starts telling Henry that she wants to clear up the mystery so that Colonel Haver can move the boat. And when she says this, Henry gets upset. He thinks that this is actually going to be a really bad thing because it will, of course, prevent him and his sister from making these trips out to the boat. And he thinks that this will be absolutely detrimental to his sister's mental health if she's not able to go see the boat when she, thinks it's that year and she should be able to go see the boat. Nancy asks him then if there's any reason that he knows of why anyone would want to sabotage the boat. And he's like, well, yeah, but it's a family thing, so I can't tell you. Okay. So Nancy and Charles get back into their canoe to head back to the River Princess, but unfortunately on their way back, it is so dark outside that they get lost. And then we kind of like flip the narration a little bit. We flip to Bess and George back on the boat, and they have decided that they are going to go aboard to look around. So they do. They don't see anyone or anything except for some like, clearly somebody has like messed up this spot since yesterday. There's like holes on the walls or something like that. Then they start to go down the stairs into the hold of the boat, and a step breaks, causing George to just like fall all the way down to the bottom of the stairs. So she gets really bruised up and her leg is kind of messed up, but she's okay. But then after this, the sun finally starts to rise. And so Nancy and Charles come back. I guess it was so dark, they decided to just wait until sunrise so that they could see where they were going. And eventually they make their way back to the River Princess. And they all together search the boat for about another hour, but they don't find anything. And they also note that the organ on board does not work at all. And that's supposedly one of the haunting things, is that people heard organ music just out of nowhere. But because this is like literally not working, there's nothing that a ghost could do to make this work. Nancy comes up with this theory that somebody is bringing like a record player on board to like play haunting sounds or ghostly music or whatever. She's also positive that there are lookouts providing the ghost with like signals to like warn people when somebody's coming and going, so that way the ghost can be gone by the time anybody gets close enough to see them.
Right.
But then they head back to Charles's house, and his mom has like covered for them with the Havers and is like, oh yeah, they spent the night here at my house. So they take,
Mrs. Bartolome. Way
I know. So nice of her. So they take like a little nap, but then they go back to the Havers' house, and Donna Mae is like, all right, what happened? How did it go with Charles? Tell me everything. And they are just like, mom's the word. They won't tell her anything about what happened or what went down. And she's like, oh my gosh, George, you're injured. Like, what happened to you? Tell me the story. Like, clearly y'all were up to something last night. And they're like, dinner was so delicious. Like, Charles's mom is the best. We love her. And like, they won't say anything other than that. So she gets like frustrated with them.
This is like so wild to think about though, because like imagine, so you're Donna, and you have a cousin come to visit you. You have an ex-fiance. They end up randomly meeting him and go to dinner with him. And then they stay out all night. And then they come back and they won't tell you what they were doing. Like, what? I mean, I would be furious.
Yeah.
I would be furious. I don't care if like you're not like you've broken up with this person. Like, there is some like proprietary, like, that's your ex-fiance. You know what I mean? Like, you've got to like respect that prior relationship. But these girls are just like, Donna's being snotty, so we're not going to tell her anything. And I do understand that it's, partially because of the mystery, they're trying to keep it quiet or whatever. But it's like, if I'm thinking about poor Donna, like, your cousins just stayed out all night with your ex-fiance.
Yeah.
Like, what?
She's assuming the very, very worst here, obviously. Like,
because they won't talk about it. They won't talk about it. What else would you assume except that, well, clearly they got together. Like, what else would you think? Like,
oh, man.
So hilarious.
Yes.
Anyway.
So she gets a little frustrated and she eventually just gives up with asking. But at this point, she tells them, like, oh, I was able to get in touch with Ned, Bert, and Dave, and they will be here for the ball or whatever. Gotcha.
Poor
so Nancy, and Bess all go into town to get costumes for the boys. Before they go, though, Nancy talks to Colonel Haver about getting a tugboat captain to move the River Princess. And he's like, oh, no, Alex already tried. He asked literally everyone in town, and they all said that either they couldn't do it or it was impossible and they won't do it. Okay. So anyway, they get to town. They get some clown costumes for the boys. Perfect. And what do you really think of Ned, Nancy?
Seriously. What subtext? My gosh.
Yes. And Nancy decides at this point that Alex's little attempts to find a tugboat captain are not good enough for her, and she needs to do her own due diligence of asking pretty much anyone she can find about this. So they're like driving home, and Nancy is like, stop the car, as soon as they're like near the waterfront, and she like jumps out and finds a tugboat and then just knocks on the door and is like, hey, Captain Man, could you please come move this boat? And he's like, absolutely, I'll be there tomorrow. So it sounds like, because I think she asked him something and he denies that he has been asked about this before or something like that. So it's clear that Alex actually did not try at all to get somebody to move the boat.
Right.
Surprise, surprise. Afterwards, Nancy decides to try to check in at the police station to see if they've made any progress on her stolen car. And they're like, no, but we did search the man's room at the boarding house where he was staying, and we found this suitcase. Nancy asks for the suitcase, and they bring it to her, and it is hers. Thank goodness. So we know that, yes, this must be the car thief who is now in New Orleans, and she opens up the suitcase, and all of her stuff is still in there, including her mother's clothing that she was going to wear for the party. Just as she is like looking through the suitcase, though, they're like, oh, never mind about not finding your car, because we literally just did. It's at a used car lot, and yay, okay, so that's solved, I guess. Apparently the man who brought it in gave his name as Ralph Winter and said that he was from New York. He had forged a bill of sale in order to sell it to the dealer and has not been caught yet. Great. So they go back to the Haver house, but on the way, Nancy wants to stop and talk to Uncle Rufus, and she asks him if he would mind like going out and basically doing like watch duty on the River Princess that night. Just take your canoe out there and just see if anything happens that night. And he agrees. He does say that none of his people would be responsible for the haunting, because I guess she kind of asks if like maybe anybody he knows has been using the boat or anything like that. And he says that when he was out on the bayou last night, he actually overheard two white northernish sounding guys saying, "I guess the old gal doesn't have any pirate gold after all." And then the other one says, "I'm going to keep her until I find out." Interesting.
Pirate gold. This is the first we're hearing of pirate gold.
I could have used a mention of pirate gold way earlier in the series, in the book. That would have been nice.
Yeah.
Inject that flavor in. I want to hear more about the pirate treasure that we might be finding. Is this Jean Lafitte's treasure? Whose treasure is this?
So many questions.
Right? We need more lore with the pirate stuff if we're going to make the big prize be pirate gold, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah. But then they get back to the house, and George excitedly pulls them aside and says that she thinks that Alex is a fake.
Oh,
thank you, George. Wonderful.
Finally.
So either his name is not actually Alex Upgrove, or his name is Alex Upgrove, but he's not who he says he is. He's not wealthy and, high society as he says that he is. She ends up saying that she flattered him a little bit and got him to talk about himself a little bit, but he kept kind of contradicting himself in his story. She even managed to get him to give her a picture of himself, saying that something flirty, I guess. And he gives her this picture of himself at Oxford, with his class at Oxford. They say, this guy looks like him, but I don't think that it's actually him. Or at least George is not convinced. So it just so happens that Nancy remembers that Henry mentioned that he went to Oxford and that he really keeps up with the school. I guess he's just really interested in knowing about current events with Oxford. So maybe he can help us in verifying whether or not this is a real photo. Also, we have to go return that hairpin to his sister anyway, so they plan to go sneak off to go visit Henry.
So yeah, they get back to Henry and Lavinia's house, and they end up meeting Lavinia, and she actually seems very lucid and intelligent when they talk to her. They give her the hairpin back, and they start talking about the River Princess, and it turns out she would actually love to see it restored and floating the river again, and would love to be able to visit it once it's back in all its glory or whatever. Go figure.
Yeah.
And they end up talking about her memories on the boat. It's actually a really sweet scene. And she mentions that there was a story that pirates hid gold under the bulkhead of the ship when no one else was on board. So this is apparently the family secret that Henry didn't want to tell us about the other day. And Henry ruefully admits that when he was younger, he actually searched for a long time to find the gold on the boat, but never ended up finding anything. So interesting. Lavinia gets tired and excuses herself, and then Nancy asks Henry about Alex and his Oxford connection. And Henry brings him to another room where he happens to have all of the class yearbooks.
Perfect.
So they look up Alex Upgrove, and they find him in the yearbook, but the picture is definitely not the Alex that they know.
It's just another guy named Alex Upgrove,
Just another guy named Alex Upgrove. And just as they're discovering this, Nancy looks up and sees the face of Alex in the window. He's peering into them in the room where they are right now, having just discovered this. And now he's learned that they know that he isn't who he says he is. And then he takes off in his car. So they head back to Sunnymead, and Ned, Bert, and Dave have actually just arrived. And Donna says something about not needing to wait on Alex for dinner because he called and said he would be delayed. But Nancy is we know really why he's, quote unquote delayed or whatever. But she doesn't want to say anything right away. So because I guess it's not tactful or something at the moment. So they end up having dinner, and then after dinner, Nancy has to awkwardly, when there's still no sign of Alex, Nancy has to spill the beans to Donna and her parents about what they found out about him earlier in the day. And yeah, it's really awkward, and Donna is obviously super upset about this, and her parents are actually kind of relieved. I guess they never really liked him either, but they're happy that she dodged a bullet and before they ended up announcing the engagement, right? So close call.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, Donna is still really upset, and she goes to bed in tears. But the next day, she actually ends up apologizing to Nancy, Bess, and George and said that she's been silly and wrong, and actually she's still in love with Charles, and that she doesn't expect him to forgive her for all of the silliness that she's been doing, the cheating on him, I guess. But she would be overjoyed if he did, and if they could get back together. Okay. So the tugboat captain also arrives that morning, and Nancy and the girls and Ned and the boys take him out to the riverboat so that he can see what needs to be done. Once there, the tugboat captain stays outside to take measurements, and the rest of them go on board to explore more. Nancy and Ned end up finding a notch hole on the floorboard, and they pull up the board, and they find the pirate treasure.
That easy.
Immediately.
Ugh.
This is Nancy's third trip to this boat. And she just finds the gold just immediately. Whereas Henry searched purportedly for most of his young adult life.
Right.
And never found it. And Nancy finds it on her third trip.
They don't even make a big deal out of it either. Like, it's not like she sees something that makes her think that that's the spot. It's just like, okay, yeah, there it is. Okay, guys, I found it. Moving on.
Well, it's
and that's
like
it.
there's like one throwaway line where it's like she realizes that the ship actually has two bulkheads or something. Like there's like the lower bulkhead and the upper bulkhead, and that probably Henry was searching the other bulkhead, but actually there's a bulkhead right there, and so they just end up looking there, and she just sees a notch hole, and they just look at it, and that's it.
Done. Check that off the list.
That's done.
Mm-hmm.
Pirate treasure found. But so then they're like literally like dancing and like jumping around with glee on the deck of this boat. And as they are like jumping around, two men with sticks come out of hiding and knock them over the head until they're unconscious.
Excellent.
So meanwhile, Bess and Dave are like on the first deck of this boat, and they notice like smoke coming out of the hold, and they think the boat must be on fire, with Ned and Nancy down in it, because that's where they were. Do you want to take the end?
Oh, sure. So Dave and Bert are able to rescue Ned and Nancy from the smoke-filled hold and bring them out onto the deck. And then they, along with the tugboat captain, are able to extinguish the fire while Nancy and Ned are kind of coming to. And they explain to them what happened about finding the treasure and getting knocked unconscious. And they look around and the treasure is gone and the assailants are gone with it. Just then, both Charles and Uncle Rufus paddle up, and Uncle Rufus says that he didn't see anything on the boat last night, but a boy reported seeing two men working last night while playing records, and he said they called each other Spike and Alex. So Uncle Rufus knows where Spike is staying in the bayou, so they all want to go catch them there at that house, I guess. And the riverboat captain actually discourages Nancy and the girls from going along because the men are so very dangerous. So Nancy, Bess, and George all return to the Havers house while the rest of them go to actually apprehend the guys.
This pisses me off so bad.
We don't need to see the actual climax of the story. That can happen off page, and then, yeah.
I know that they're just doing it so that they don't have to spend the time to, because this is the last chapter of the book, so they just like need to wrap it up or whatever.
Right.
But they're like, oh, I know, we'll just give a sexist reason why the girls can't go. So annoying. Anyway.
It doesn't take them long to come back, though. They announced that they were able to catch Spike and take him to the police, and now he's in jail, but Alex got away with the gold. Spike did confess to having been the one to steal Nancy's car and sabotage their journey. Great. So the tugboat captain is able to get the River Princess down to Sunnymead, and everyone pitches in, working night and day to restore it. We've got I think they're there for weeks, honestly, in New Orleans. They spend a lot of time restoring this, and then they successfully get it ready for the performance just in time for the start of Mardi Gras. The Mardi Gras.
The Mardi Gras.
They all then go downtown for the parades. A couple of days later at a different parade, now everyone is getting into costume, and Nancy has a hunch that tonight will be the night that Alex tries to show up. She thinks that the drawing... Okay.
I know.
She comes to the conclusion that, oh my gosh, we still don't know what that drawing was that Alex dropped out of his car, but we remember it was like this reddish, maroonish rectangle with a gold stripe through it. So that must mean, obviously, that he is communicating to someone else, I guess the Spike person, that he is going to be on a parade float that is a maroon float with like gold trim on it.
Mm-hmm.
And she assumes that he has rented the actual gold pirate coins to the parade officials and is going to use the money for his getaway. Now, I don't know why any of that is necessary for him to get away.
Nope. He already has the pirate gold.
But in order for him to get out of town with the pirate gold, he first needs to dress up as a pirate, sit on the Mardi Gras parade float, and then throw out like candy and beads to people while holding the real pirate treasure, and then he'll get away?
Yep. You got it right, Kori.
Why is he still in town?
He shouldn't be.
Anyway, so Nancy is correct.
Yes.
They're standing there watching the parade in their fairy and clown costumes or whatever. Not really the fairy costume, but they're in their costumes and they're watching the parade, and there goes Alex on a maroon and gold float dressed as a pirate holding the chest of coins. So they alert the police, and Alex notices them in the crowd doing this. So he starts shoving the coins into his pockets and just runs off. So Ned tackles him, and then he gets arrested and carted away. And he admits that he met Spike months ago, and Spike said that he needed someone, quote unquote, with class to ingratiate themselves into Donna's family to keep tabs on what was going on with the riverboat so that they had an opportunity to steal the coins.
Yeah.
And apparently Alex was so committed to this fraud that he was actually going to go through with the wedding.
Oh my God.
Because doing so would actually improve his position in society because they're this rich family or whatever. So he does get something out of it either way, even if they didn't get caught with the pirate thing. Oh my gosh.
Well, and the fact that he was on the float to begin with gets explained as him wanting to do that as a surprise to Donna Mae had they not been found out.
Right. Why bring the real coins on the float? Surely there are plastic coins that the parade people can use as a prop.
I don't know. I think maybe that was supposed to be the surprise to Donna Mae. It's very unclear. But I think that maybe him finding the treasure was supposed to be the surprise to Donna Mae.
Right. And then they were still going to use that on the float? It doesn't make sense to me why he would need to use real coins on the float.
No.
But anyway, so he's been arrested now, and they all go back to Sunnymead, and we have our, little happy ending moment here. Colonel Haber goes over to Nancy and asks her if she would like to take the entire pirate treasure as a reward/souvenir for solving the crime. And she's like, oh, no, I could possibly never do that. I will just take one. I just need one gold coin as my souvenir. And then Donna pulls Nancy aside and thanks her for having solved this mystery because it means that she and Charles could get back together now. And Nancy is the one who helped her realize that love is more precious than gold.
Mm-hmm.
Blah, blah, blah. The River Princess is restored. The end.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh my gosh. So ridiculous. Slow clap indeed.
Where do we start?
Okay, I don't know. I mean, let's just start with the racism because it's just too important to not start with that. Okay. So, as you were saying kind of at the beginning, it's really just kind of throughout the book.
Right.
But there are some moments that particularly stand out to me. But, we talk about the setting in New Orleans. We do talk about some of the history with slavery. We see slave cabins as Nancy, Bess, and George, I think, are driving in to Sunnymead. I don't know if they see them on the property, but they see them as they are driving in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
We also talk about pirates smuggling slaves in from Africa. We talk about how horrible Jean Lafitte is for having done that. which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like usually when we get references to slavery, honestly, they just say stuff like, "Oh, how quaint," which is so wild. But it does feel like there were moments in this where they do call out like the appalling nature of slavery, which I felt like was encouraging. But like I said before, even though we do provide that context, that doesn't stop us from being racist to all the other Black people who were like populating this book.
Yes.
So
we can say like this was bad, but we have no problem with doing the othering and like, yes, we need to be separate. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, I mean, yes, it's 1957. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that probably at the time, a lot of white Americans probably were unaware of, you know, the realities of kind of like racism at that time. But also I think that that's also not true for many Americans at that time, because civil rights was very much alive and active at that time. Mm-hmm. So like, so the fact that this book decides to take that tack, instead of like being on the side of civil rights, it seems like, well, we're just not going to talk about that. We're just going to kind of ignore that, and not think about, racism right now. Mm-hmm. We'll think about racism as being something like a long time ago.
Racism is always an outdated old thing that's not here in the present anymore. Right. It's always that way, isn't it?
Even though like this is 1957, like people were calling it out at this point. You know what I mean? So like it wouldn't have been outside of the time period for this book to also do that. I do think part of that is probably due to the fact that I'm not saying that this is correct. This is a correct take at all. But I do think that some of that probably comes from the fact that they tried to make Nancy Drew books kind of timeless. Yeah. Of course, that's at this point is like moot, right?
Right.
It just does not matter. It is not successful anymore. But at the time, they wanted to make it seem as though like this book could happen at any point in time.
Right.
And so I think probably that's part of the reason. But unfortunately, the effect of that is just a disappointing racist portrayal. So it's unfortunate.
It did make me wonder if, a reader in 1957 would have sat down and viewed Nancy as like you said, like a more progressive character, as being very role model-y, that she doesn't inherently treat our Black characters like they are less than her, even though, well, she does talk down to them, certainly, and she is very comfortable with ordering them around. Yes, she does not ask Uncle Rufus, hey, would you mind doing this? It's, hey, I have a job for you. You're going to do this, right? But
that's
she's not, she's not like outwardly horrible, though. She's not.
She's appreciative. She thanks them for their help and goes out of her way to praise them, particularly Mammy Matilda and Pappy Cole, about how great dinner was. She does that kind of stuff. She talks to them directly. It's not like she communicates to them via messages. She talks to them face to face.
Right. So all of that kind of behavior makes it seem to me like maybe they did put that in because at the time that would have been like... very gracious of Nancy to even give them the time of her day. Like,
well, especially considering that she's a guest in someone else's home.
Right.
I feel like, to recognize and to call out like that someone else is in service of you, like via being a servant for someone else. You know what I mean? I feel like that was probably a progressive attitude at the time.
Right.
But also, we talked a little bit about this before. I think their treatment of voodoo, which is, of course, a historically Black religion in New Orleans, was pretty progressive for the time as well, too. First of all, that like we don't do a whole lot of like curiosity and investigating what the voodoo is actually like about and what it looks like or whatever, but we don't negatively characterize it. Outside of like the girl's initial trepidation and fear of it, it very quickly becomes just kind of like a normal part of the character of Uncle Rufus and kind of what's happening in the area, which is like how it is. You know what I mean? So I really appreciate that. And I do feel like in other books, even, we get characterizations of like other kinds of religions like that. We probably have references to voodoo in other books as well that are not as, that are much more like fear mongering, like othering, like, oh, these people are so alternative and other and, you know,
scary
and evil even. But that is definitely not this in the book. Uncle Rufus is like portrayed as being this really great, helpful stand-up guy in his community. And it's not despite the voodoo. It's like because of the voodoo. Like he's helping people with his voodoo, you know? Like, so yeah. So I felt like that was really progressive for the time.
I thought that that's the way it was going to go, that they were going to demonize him for those practices. And I really was afraid of what the ending was going to be.
Yeah.
And then it just wasn't that. So it was very, very nice to not have that.
Yeah. But not nice to hear all of the rest of it. And I do really specifically want to talk about that moment in the book where Uncle Rufus talks about how his ancestors, and of course he doesn't say this specifically, but he means his ancestors in Africa, were the first people to come up with the concept of like, you know, long distance communication via like drumming.
Right.
And I think that in and of itself is a very clear effort on the part of the book to say like, hey, we're recognizing the history of Black people. And I think that that's positive, but also, unfortunately, it's a really racist point in the book, because that in and of itself is like erasing the very clear and present history of racism that's happening like right now.
Right.
Because it's making it seem like, oh, well, don't worry, like that was a long time ago. But it wasn't. This book was written in 1957, and Uncle Rufus is being portrayed as elderly. And yes, one, Jim Crow is happening literally right now. Right. But two, Uncle Rufus, if he is elderly, he could have been an enslaved person.
Easily.
Like, easily. And if not him, then most likely his parents or his grandparents were almost definitely here as a result of slavery. So to say... To have him say and present that like, oh, my ancestors, wasn't it so cool that we did this stuff? And it's like, I cannot imagine. Now, I am a white woman. I just want to make that clear. I'm a white woman. I don't know what it's like to be a Black person in the U.S. I certainly don't know what it's like to be a Black person in the U.S. in 1957. But I cannot imagine a Black person who is helping three little white girls travel the bayou and is just openly talking about, quote unquote, his ancestors cheerfully, as if he's not currently being extremely like persecuted. You know what I mean?
Have the privilege like we do of talking about our ancestors. He was robbed of his ancestry.
That's also another thing, right? Like one, it's the presumption that like he is happy and cheerfully talking about his history in a time when that would be extremely painful to do. Right. But the other side of that coin too is, yes, what you were saying is that he has absolutely no avenue, very likely, to know where it is that he came from. Like that was like part of the horrific cruelty of slavery, is that people were ripped from their homes, ripped from their families and culture, and have... And then when they get to where they are enslaved, and the practices that they were participating in Africa were criminalized and absolutely just erased and taken from them. And so there would be no avenue for him to know those things. And there still isn't an avenue for many Black people today, almost a majority of Black people today, to know that history and know where they came from. So it's just such a, just like the fact that they put that in there is like a flag, a hallmark that like, I see you trying to be progressive and do the right thing, but like, oh my gosh, how badly did you get it wrong?
Yeah.
Like
leaving out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just so frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to talk about that specifically because I felt like it was such an important point in the book, and it really, I think it kind of speaks to overall how the book was. It was such a good example of the tone of the whole book as far as race and slavery and racism was, you know? So, yeah. Okay. What else do we want to talk about with that?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It feels like there's just so much of it that
it's hard to approach because it's so interwoven. They do a lot. Oh, we should talk about Mammy Matilda and Pappy Cole.
Yeah.
So they're called Mammy and Pappy, which seems like a racist.
Well, it's very
portrayal.
stereotypical.
Very stereotypical. Yeah. They also do a lot in their dialect to call it out.
Oh, the phonetical spellings and everything.
Yes.
Oh, it was very hard to read.
Yeah. And so I think it's one thing. I think a lot of people take that device of like, you know, using that kind of like dialogue to characterize someone as being just like, oh, well, they're just talking in an accent. So like, of course, you know, they're doing that for that reason, but that's not it.
No, we're using it to make them sound uneducated, to make it very clear that they're not a part of our social class up here where we are.
And it's very clear because they don't, even though we know that the Havers and Donna Mae are both Southern people, they grew up in the South and all this stuff, we don't show them as speaking with an accent. No. Even though they probably would have some kind of accent. Maybe it would be different from Mammy Matilda and Pappy Cole's, but
it would have some drawl to it for sure.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah.
But we don't do that. The only people that we see speak that way are people who are either stated as being people of color or people who it's heavily implied.
It's like, ambiguous, and they indicate it by making them speak that way, so you know.
Exactly. Yeah. So that is almost definitely like a racist hallmark. And I was so especially frustrated when they did that with Uncle Rufus. And at one point, I mean, they do it whenever Uncle Rufus speaks, but at one point he mentions like taking them out by canoe. Mm-hmm. And we write canoe like KA-NOO or something. And I'm like, okay, this makes no sense. Mm-hmm. Like, to spell it out that way as if, like, that's not just, like, the phonetic, like, spelling. The actual phonetic spelling of canoe. But, like, other times when Nancy says canoe or, like, someone else says canoe, it's just spelled normally.
Right.
I was so pissed off. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, we have to go so far to make sure that we know that he's talking differently, even in a word that when you pronounce it doesn't sound different. Like, yeah.
Canoe, like, how are you saying that out loud to make it different than canoe?
You're not. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So it's, like, so clearly just such an effort to be like, yeah, see, they can't speak, quote unquote, normally. Like, they're not speaking, you know, proper English because, look, it's not spelled right, even though it sounds the same. Yeah. It sounds the same. So that doesn't make any sense when it's in spoken. Well, it's in speech. Like, that doesn't make sense.
That bothered me too. Yeah, big time.
It pissed me off so bad. So bad. There are also other kind of, like, side characters in the book, like, just kind of one-off characters that they mention as being, quote-unquote, Negro. There's the bystander, the witness in the neighborhood that we were talking about, and then the little boy also who comes out of Uncle Rufus's house, and also the little boy that Uncle Rufus refers to as tipping him off that Alex and Spike were the ones on the riverboat. And so I feel like that is almost like, this may be the book with like the most representation of Black people that we've ever seen in a Nancy Drew book. I can't remember there's been more than one in another book, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in this book at least.
Yeah, it seems like they were like, okay, the South. What do we know about the South? Black people live there. I'm telling you, Harriet never went to New Orleans before she wrote this book.
Yeah.
Where are all the French names? Come on.
Yeah, seriously.
Need to rewatch Scooby-Doo, The Haunted Showboat.
I know. Well, so after this, yeah, you talked about replaying Legend of the Crystal Skull just as like a palate cleanser to like remember New Orleans and not have to think about like, you know, the horrible racist moments that we read in the book. But
I need to put hot sauce in gumbo and not read about all these.
I started watching a playthrough of someone playing Legend of the Crystal Skull just because I need that. I need that. You're so right.
It's very representative of New Orleans. I feel like they characterize the city very well, even though, like, we only see a little bit of it, you know?
You mean in Legend of the Crystal Skull?
Yes.
Yeah.
The book, I don't feel like characterized it at all. Like, we mention a few street names that are actually street names from New Orleans, and then everything else, it just seems like, I don't know. I could be totally wrong. Harriet could have been to New Orleans many times in her life, but it just seemed to me like somebody that was just regurgitating what they read in like a travel flyer or a guidebook or something, and not somebody that has actually been there and experienced like the culture. Because that's what I thought we were getting. I thought we were getting like aspects of the culture and then like a haunted, gothic, spooky mystery. And then it really just turns out to be like a few chapters about the Showboat, but then everything else is just like, hey, what about Jim Crow laws? And
no, they don't. They don't say anything.
No, they don't. They don't. But it feels. The rest of it just feels
think
like
about that.
The rest of it feels like, hey, we're living on this plantation, and like, look at how our life is compared to like the rest of society. And I don't know. It just feels like it was just a very much class differences was the unspoken character in the book, very much. Not just New Orleans being the background flavor that we need.
Speaking of class differences, let's talk about Alex. Okay.
Yes.
Because so his character is purportedly to have met Spike before the events of this mystery, like months ago, and that Spike needed someone who was quote unquote well classed. Is that what they say? With class. Someone with class. And so now we don't actually know. The book never tells us like what Alex's backstory actually is outside of him meeting Spike. We don't know where he came from. We just know that his real name is not Alex Uptown or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It's not Uptown. It's Up something else.
Upton.
No, it's because I kept wanting to call him Uptown, but I thought that was way too on the nose. He has a different name. It's not Uptown. It's
Upgrove.
There
we go.
But so if Spike identified him as being someone with class, then he must be from originally a wealthier class of family, right?
Maybe.
Presumably, or just a really good actor.
And can ingratiate himself and
but
obtain the class.
I'm not saying that this is true, but I feel like with Nancy Drew mystery stories historically, they always, literally just in The Sign of the Twisted Candles that we just read, they portray people as either having class if they are wealthy or they do not have class if they are not wealthy. There is no way to fool anybody that you are of a class that you do not belong to. And so I feel like there's no way that they would say that if he wasn't actually of a higher class, quote unquote, you know? But so that just makes me interested. What kind of high class con man is this guy?
Right.
And also, how freaking despicable is he? Littering, hitting on Nancy, like just the worst.
Right.
Also planning to steal this gold and then still marry Donna Mae. Like, unreal.
Wait, so is his name actually Alex Upgrove?
No.
And he just happens to have the same name as somebody who went to Oxford? Or did he find somebody at Oxford named Alex Upgrove and steal the identity?
I assume he stole the identity because they talk in the end specifically about him. The picture that he had was like that he gave to George was actually like an Oxford photograph or something, but it was like doctored in some way. They mentioned that specifically. So he's not actually that Alex Upgrove. Right. So, and he clearly didn't doctor the yearbook. So that's not him. So he has to have a different name.
Right. maybe he just like stole the identity and was like, because you're posing as this person who already has, because presuming the real Alex Upgrove is like actually.
Oh, like maybe he was already a con man and was already pretending to be Alex Upgrove.
Right. And it's like, because you're going around telling people that you're this Oxford graduate, why don't you just go marry Donna Mae? And then we'll be able to have easier access to the Showboat.
That makes more sense.
That could be it, right?
Yeah.
I'm also confused about just where Spike and Alex came from.
Yes.
Because we keep talking about this like group of people from upstate New York and like these people from the travel agency that are sending all these guys to New Orleans.
I thought that was going to be something for sure. Something with the travel agency, because I was like, what is that?
Or that it was like a bigger group of people, that it was more than just the two of them, just because it feels like we were referencing upstate New York a lot. And then it just happened to not really be that. So hold on. At the beginning, Alex is already in New Orleans, and Spike is presumably in New York, but he's on his way to New Orleans to like help with the boat. But he was already there because the hauntings have already started. But then we find out that Nancy's been hired, so Spike travels to River Heights, steals the car, plants the bomb, and then follows her back to New Orleans before Nancy even knows what the mystery is, because Nancy doesn't learn about the Showboat until she arrives in New Orleans. So she doesn't even know that she's been assigned to this task yet, but they're already trying to get her off of the task.
Presumably.
Right. Yeah. But, the only reason that they'd put the bomb in the car is to stop her from going to New Orleans to look into this.
Yeah.
Big plot hole for me. I don't know why that bothers me so much, but it bothered me so much. Why?
I mean, well, okay, so it could be. So the thing is we don't know how they learned about the pirate treasure. That's the biggest plot hole for me. Yeah. Is because it's supposedly, I guess the way that Henry talks about it, he talks about it being like a family secret, but they also mention about how it was like a rumor or something set out to like discredit his grandfather or something for some reason. I don't know. That part didn't really make sense to me. But so I guess if they had caught wind of that rumor somehow from like years and years ago, that's how it was. But and then they met up. But like, why now? And the order of events doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, it would only make sense if they like met somewhere else. They had like just learned about this rumor from some rando person probably, and then Spike sends Alex down south, and then he plans to follow later, except Alex tells him that they plan to hire Nancy Drew, who's like a friend of Donna Mae's cousin, and he knows from the Havers that she's actually like a successful detective or something, and that they should be concerned about that, and so that he needs to try to prevent her from coming. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. But that's just it just seems very vague.
It still doesn't even explain New York either. Like, why is he...
Except that that's where they're just from, but...
It doesn't seem relevant at all, but it keeps coming up so much that you think it's going to be relevant.
Yeah, I thought for sure that the travel agency was going to be some kind of criminal enterprise. Right. Sending criminals, ferrying criminals back and forth for some kind of organized crime purpose.
And then it would make sense that some other rando would be doing the car thing, because then that person wouldn't have to also be in New Orleans to be doing the hauntings, you know? Like...
Well, I assumed that Spike is the one who moved the car from the boarding house, that he was inside at the time, because the piece of paper was missing.
Oh, I just meant the car stuff just on the drive, just at Nancy's house, and then just like putting the bomb in her car and then stealing the car and
I see.
pouring the acid, whatever else happens with the car. Just like, that's really far away to be going back and forth and sabotaging her that way, you know?
For real. It's also implied too, they don't actually say this. They don't say to what extent he did all of this sabotage stuff, but it's kind of implied too that he set up that detour and down to the power line.
Right. No, he definitely did the power line thing, I feel like. It was like too much about it to not be that,
Which is like, dude, how freaking extra. You've stolen her car, you've planted a bomb, you've poured acid on her car, now you're following her, now you're trying to like set up like a roadside accident. Like, what the heck? My gosh.
Also, what would Alex had done with Nancy if they had gone on that showboat tour that morning?
I don't know.
Would he have just killed her and then have to come up with some backstory?
There's no way,
Not really.
There's no way he would have killed her, but like, Lord knows. Like, yeah, what was his plan?
Right.
Was his plan to like either not like run her into the detour himself, or like otherwise like try to scare her? Maybe he'll have Spike shoot at them or something.
Yeah, and then
be like, oh, it's too dangerous. We can't do this anymore, which is kind of what he tried to do so I assume that's ultimately what it was, but
that's probably
it. It's sinister to think about.
It's very scary. It's like so many bad things could have happened had she not.
Especially when you consider the fact that he was hitting on her too.
Right.
Like the majority of the time. So it's like, wait a second. wait. So you simultaneously are here to thwart Nancy, but you're also attracted to her and want to what? Date her? Marry her? Have sex with her? Like, what? Because you also want to marry Donna Mae.
Yeah, you're so committed to doing that now.
So, like, what's the plot here? What's your plan, dude? Like, if you really are committed to marrying Donna Mae and you're here as being this con man, why are you hitting on Nancy? Like,
that would blow your cover, if anything.
That would blow your cover out of the water. Are we just supposed to assume that you are just, like, the trashiest, most awful man, that you cannot control yourself and you cannot, like, stop yourself from hitting on another woman? It's also in play, too, that later, because George is feeling really icked out about having to, like, suck up to him and, like, flatter him to get
the picture.
Get the picture. She's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he thinks we all have a crush on him now. Like, ugh.
Yeah. Ugh. Just feed his ego a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, so it's like, what kind of man are you?
Not a good one.
You litter bugs. See, I'm telling you, this is the only thing you need to know about someone.
That's
is whether
how you know.
or not they litter, because that will tell you everything you need to know. Okay? No respect for the law, no respect for the environment, careless, lazy, litter bug. You don't want them in your life. Okay? Okay? All right.
Oh my gosh. If he'll litter, there's no telling what else he'll do.
Seriously. It's not even a joke, Kori. I'm not even being sarcastic.
No.
I mean it. I'm so serious.
Yes.
Don't mess around with litter bugs, everybody.
That's the litmus test right there.
Oh.
Does he litter? He's probably also got stolen pirate treasure stashed away somewhere.
Does he drop his trash on the ground? He is trash. Don't mess with him. Okay?
Leave him in the street.
Oh my gosh. All right. There is one little hilarious part that I want to talk about, speaking of Alex. So right after, like, at one point where where Alex mentions that he's going to tell the colonel that, like, the girls need to not investigate anymore because it's, like, too dangerous or whatever. But, like, previously he had been, like, excitedly trying to figure out Nancy's plans or something. Mm-hmm. And so, like, the girls, after he said, like, oh, you shouldn't investigate anymore, they, like, go upstairs. And I think Bess and George, they, like, remarked, one of them says something about how, like, oh, and it's women who get a bad rap for frequently changing their minds.
Oh, right. That was good, yeah.
I was like, oh, props. Snaps for that one. That was good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that might be all that I have for this one. Yeah, I wish that we had gotten more of the spook factor, more time on the boat, more time investigating, more time looking into just the whole pirate idea and looking into information behind that. I don't know.
Absolutely.
I wanted a spooky gothic southern mystery, and that's not what we got, I don't feel like.
More pirates, less racism. Yes. Unfortunately, I did not get that.
Just set it in New Orleans. Like, plantations do not have to be the shining charm of the state of Louisiana. We could have just focused on the city of New Orleans and the history there.
Like a beautiful city house with the balconies and all of that. Like,
so nice.
Courtyard. Like, that would have been gorgeous.
No, it was a choice to set this on a plantation, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a shame.
Anyway.
Yes.
Wow.
Flashlight score?
Oh, no.
Oh.
I'm talking myself out of giving it a 1 because I don't truly think that it's as awful as some of the other ones that we've had.
Mm-hmm.
It's not on Civil Acts.
Mm-mm. It was different. It's different.
It's different
than a lot of Nancy Drew books. It stands out to me.
It stands out to me not in the best way with the plot structure, just again because it bothers me that this Showboat really feels like the least important part of the whole story. I don't know. I think I'm going to give it 2 flashlights.
Okay. I'm torn. I'm honestly torn because a part of me feels like there were so many promising parts to this book that could be really good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think the plot definitely has a lot of problems, like you were talking about. There's too much. It's too random.
Maybe it does deserve a 1. Oh gosh.
But at the same time, like the spooks that are in there, I'm like, if they had focused on really building up the setting, it could be so good. Minus the racism. That's the other drawback, is the racism. But I do feel like also when I was reading this book, I was so interested, and I sped through this book. I read it in half the time that I usually do. Yeah. I did not have a problem with that. So, but I do think that part of that is more of me just being curious about, in an anthropological kind of way, of reading this as a book that was written in 1957 and seeing the way they were talking about race and race relations. I was like, this is interesting, not good, but interesting to me. And so for that, I don't know. I feel like I don't want to say I had a good time reading it, but I didn't have a bad time.
I thought it was like a slog. I had to like force myself to finish this one.
Okay.
It was, yeah, I don't know.
I feel like there are so many books that have bored me way more than this.
Fair. Very fair.
I have been bored in books. And I do think that if we're considering books as a form of entertainment, which these books are supposed to be,
of course,
it's like a boring book is worse than a controversial yet exciting / interesting book.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'm going to give it a 3.
All right.
Middle of the road, because it has lots of controversial things. The plot is not great. I don't think the plot is necessarily worse than other mystery stories that we have had, but also like all of the controversial stuff is what's knocking it down the stars. I think the story itself has promise and is not particularly different than the other ones, and I didn't have a hugely bad time reading it. So I'm gonna give it
good.
3. That's there we go. That's my
Very
flash score.
Excellent. Well,
okay.
We've got one more spooky story.
We sure do. Do you want to say what it is, Kori?
Sure. It is number 15, The Haunted Bridge.
Ooh.
This is, of course, the theme this year for the Spooky Hollow, for the Sleepy Hollow Nancy Drew convention. So we're very excited to get to read that before we head to the convention this year.
Yes.
It'll be very, very nice.
Yeah, so we'll read The Haunted Bridge for our next episode, and then the episode after that will be our convention episode, where we will talk about everything that we get to do when we're there.
I'm so excited. It's going to be so much fun.
Me too. It's coming up soon. It's fast approaching.
Mm-hmm.
I feel not emotionally, mentally prepared.
Yes. Well, hopefully by reading this book, we will become mentally prepared, because that's half of it anyway, is getting into the theme, right?
Got to get the vibes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So if you guys are going to be there, let us know. Hopefully, listening to this along with us will help get you into the excited spirit as well. But if you're not going, hopefully that'll give you some context if you are going to listen to the convention episode anyway. But yeah, I mean, it's a mystery story, so it's hopefully will be a classic fun time regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will see you next time, Regular Drews.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Regular Nancy Drew. Email us at regularnancydrew@gmail.com.
If you like this episode, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe.
You can also follow us on Instagram at Regular Nancy Drew and Twitter at RegularND.
You can also support us on Patreon. Patrons at the $3 level vote on upcoming episode topics and get exclusive access to our Scoop Sesh series.
And all patrons receive early access to each episode, as well as weekly bonus content.
And to all you Regular Drews out there, thanks for listening.